Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome for our fourth webinar of the Turkish Tribunal. The Turkey Tribunal will be organized soon now in May, and we have several subjects that we judged about, and one of them is the freedom of the press. Today, that's the subject of our webinar, freedom of the press, and we have several distinguished speakers who will help us and who will give insight in this very important topic. Human rights are essentially, and it is impossible not to link them to democracy. And who says democracy, who says freedom of the press? Without counterpowers, counterbalances in a free and critical press, the democracy can never survive. And without democracy, human rights cannot survive neither. So that gives well the importance of our webinar today. And the first one who will speak is Philippe Leruth. Philippe Leruth is a journalist, active, and he was the president of the International Association of Journalists. So he's well placed to talk about the freedom of the press. He published a report on the freedom of the press. For the people who want to read the report, it is on our website. The website is turkeytribunal.com, very simple, turkeytribunal.com, and you can find the report there. But Philippe now, for 10-12 minutes, will give us an insight in the findings of his report. Philippe, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Philippe Leruth, and I am a veteran Belgian journalist, almost retired after 40 years long career. And through those years, I had a double life. I mean by this, I dedicated myself to the defense of rights of journalists on national, then on European, and then on world level. And when I speak of journalists' rights, I mean by this social rights, but evidently the defense of higher objectives, and press freedom is the most important of them. And in this context, I have been confronted for almost 2 decades with the problem of press freedom in Turkey. And this is why I was asked to draft this report and to answer 2 questions. Can Turkey be considered as a country with a sufficient degree of press freedom? And can the decisions taken after the attempted coup of 15 July 2016 be considered a normal reaction for a country under attack? The answer to the first question should be easy, as Turkey has accepted several international declarations and agreements, such as the International Human Rights Declaration, which acknowledges freedom of expression as a fundamental human right, and the European Convention of Human Rights, which regulates freedom of expression at Article 10 and Article 19. The European Court of Human Rights' task is to verify whether the European Convention of Human Rights is respected or not in national cases. And along the years, its jurisprudence rarely accepts national decisions that limit freedom of press and expression. Many court cases relating to freedom of expression in Turkey and involving Turkish journalists and or media have been dealt with by the European Court of Human Rights through the years. And since the year 2000, Turkey was condemned in 93.90% of the cases. When we speak of press freedom in Turkey, we refer to a long story of infringement of press freedom, notably by the times of the military dictatorship of the 1980 coup. But as democracy was restored, press freedom gained momentum and hope grew up that eventually the level of press freedom in Turkey would be equal to the level of press freedom in all democratic states. When President Recep Tayyip Erdogan came to power first as prime minister, the hope remained, even though Kurdish and Armenian journalists remained under pressure, or worse. I refer by this to the murder on 19 January 2007 of Hrant Dink, the famous Armenian journalist who published a bilingual weekly in Istanbul. And as the years went by, the hope vanished. The repression of Armenian and Kurdish journalists was progressively extended to leftist journalists, nationalist or so-called Kemalist journalists, and investigative journalists, especially in the Ergenekon case. As you know, Ergenekon was the name of an alleged criminal network preparing to overthrow the government. And between June 2007 and November 2009, some 300 people, including journalists, were arrested and 194 prosecuted in this context. I remember the detention of two famous investigative journalists, Nedim Sener and Ahmet Sik, in 2011, which shocked the Turkish public opinion, but who were meant to also to make all Turkish journalists aware of the fact that nobody was safe for being arrested. A report of the European Commission addressed to the European Parliament and Council on 10 October 2012 noted, I quote, "The increasing incidence on violations of freedom of expression raise serious concerns, and freedom of the media continues to be further restricted in practice." From 6 to 14 April 2016, the Commissioner for Human Rights of the Council of Europe conducted a visit to Turkey. His report was published on 15 February 2017. He noticed that, I quote, "that already high level of intolerance towards legitimate criticism of elected officials and their policies has further increased." And he added that, unfortunately, the deterioration of media freedom and freedom of expression in Turkey, which as just described had already reached serious alarming levels, has intensified even further under the state of emergency declared by the Turkish government following the failed coup attempt on 15 July 2016. And indeed, between his visit and the publication of his report, the attempt coup had occurred and launched a huge repression against lawyers, academics, trade unionists, civil servants, and also journalists in Turkey. As a consequence, by the end of 2016, 178 media outlets were closed by executive decrees. A further 30 publishers were closed down and their books banned. Almost 3,000 journalists were sacked without any social rights, and up to 261 of them were jailed, according to the Special Rapporteur on the promotion of the right to freedom of opinion and expression, who conducted an official visit to Turkey from 14 to 18 November 2016 at the invitation of the Turkish government. In his report, he underlined that news coverage that is perceived as negative to the state may be subject to punishment by authorities. Almost 3 years later, a joint international press mission of several journalists and media organizations paid a visit to Turkey from 11 to 13 September 2019. Its report recalled that anti-terrorism legislation is for the most part poorly defined, leaving room for prosecutors to conflate criticism of government with terrorist propaganda. In its annual report 2020, the Platform to Strengthen the Protection of Journalism and the Safety of Journalists, created by the Council of Europe in 2015, confirmed that, I quote, "journalists in Turkey continue to suffer violations of the rule of law and their right to a fair trial." The Joint International Press Freedom Mission had also noticed the need for online broadcasters to pass through a security check by the National Intelligence Organization and the police, and that excessive license fees posed, I quote, a severe threat to media pluralism. The new bill approved by the Turkish parliament on 29 July 2020 compels media companies with over 1 million users a day to have representatives based in Turkey or who are Turkish nationals, and tech companies to store their data locally. To conclude, I want to answer the two questions raised. Can Turkey be considered as a country with sufficient degree of press freedom? If we take into consideration that Turkey has been condemned for violation of the European Convention of Human Rights 154 times since 2000, that the number of journalists can be pre-trial or convicted for long-term imprisonment makes Turkey one of the undisputed leading jailer of journalists worldwide, we can conclude that the level of press freedom is certainly not sufficient to qualify Turkey as a democracy. The second question, can we consider that the reaction to the attempted coup of 15 July 2016 can be considered as a normal reaction for a democracy under attack? The timing of targeting a long list of journalists and media outlets only a few days after the failed coup shows that these journalists and media had been on Turkish government list well before the failed coup, and that the closure and expropriation of media outlets can besides only be seen as a strategy of the part of the Turkish government to destroy critical voices and further cripple freedom of the press and expression. On this question also it can be concluded that the violation of press freedom committed by the Turkish government can no longer be considered as a reaction linked to the attempted coup or aiming at fighting political violence and terrorism. And my ultimate conclusion would be a tribute to the Turkish journalists who, despite this dangerous context, remain eager to defend their press freedom and do their jobs in a very professional way. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. It's a very clear answer to the two questions, and I think indeed also your final conclusion to pay tribute to the journalists who are in a very difficult situation or still doing their job is very welcome and needed. The second speaker now is a bit different. He's professor. He's you see that in the library that's behind him. A professor has to have a good library, and we see that our second speaker has a nice library. He's Professor Oran Baskın. He is a human rights activist also, and if I am right, he was also writing for some time in the newspaper Agos, which already has been mentioned with Armenian-Turkish publication. So Professor Baskın will explain us and give some more insight in the global context also. Oran, can you take the floor, please? Thank you for participating anyhow.
Thank you very much, Professor Leruth, but I prefer to speak in my mother tongue.
I would like to start off by giving you a few statistical figures. After giving you these statistics, I would like to speak about a few special situations. First of all, Member of Parliament and lawyer Sezgin Tanrıkulu gave a report. He said that throughout the past 18 years, that is, since the present government has been in power, 808 journalists have been imprisoned, and 87 of these are still in prison. We saw the most journalists being imprisoned in 2017, and that's the year when 206 journalists were jailed. 27,493 people underwent torture. The next statistics I would like to talk about concern the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. During the past 60 years, Turkey is the country which has violated the most rights. There have been 3,309 cases. After Turkey, there's Russia, Italy, Ukraine, and Romania. If you ask me which violations are we talking about, we're talking about the violation of one's right to a free trial. There were 287 cases. The right to freedom and security, 208 cases. 194 torture cases, 122 cases concerning the right to protection of property, 85 cases concerning the right to live. Professor Yaman Akdeniz, who is a militant in human rights in Turkey, also tells us that until October 2007, 140,000 URLs were blocked, 42,000 tweets, and 11,000 YouTube videos were blocked. Okay, let's leave statistics to one side. And I'd like to tell you about a few situations. In Turkey, news, tweets, or other messages which the government does not like are simply blocked, immediately blocked. But what's very interesting here is that this censorship is also censored. So you write some news, it's censored, it's blocked, but you cannot say that it's been censored or blocked. So people can't know. We saw the same thing when Menderes was prime minister. I was 13, 14 years old then. And something that's even worse than censoring censorship is, you're going to ask me, what could be worse than that? Well, you know, in Turkey we can do worse of everything. So a man is kidnapped on the street. He's tortured and then released. But it's forbidden to ask what happened to that man. A few days ago, 12 people asked about such a person who had been tortured and then released. And these 12 people were taken under custody. Something that's even worse than this. In Turkey, it's not only freedom of expression that's forbidden. It's also the freedom of thought that's forbidden. Only 3 years ago, when people talked to me about the freedom of thought, I thought this was a strange expression, because when you think, your thoughts remain in your head. How can people open my mind, open my brain, and look into it? How can they restrain my freedom of thought? But it seems I was very wrong. I'll give you just one example, but there are many examples to give. Ömer Faruk Gergerlioğlu. He's a medical doctor, a member of parliament. He went to a conference, and after having listened to the conference, he goes home, but he's taken to court. Why? Because he did not protest against the person who spoke at the conference. He didn't ask him any questions. It's unbelievable. It's not only the freedom of expression that we don't have the freedom to think. Besides this, there are some words that we can't use. Who can't use these words? Of course, it's not the government, it's not members of government who can't use these words. It's members of the opposition who can't use them. For example, it's a crime to say dictator. Worse than that is to use the word militant. But President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan, and the president of the AKP, and the Minister of the Interior, Süleyman Soylu, can use these words as they like. For example, the president called Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, the president of the opposition, a dictator. In Turkey, the members of the opposition can be one of three things or all three of them. They're either a terrorist, or a separatist, or an LGBTI. But sometimes you're all three of them. Another incredible example the government can meddle into exam questions in universities. At the University of Marmara, questions which were asked at the exam came under a criminal investigation. Another example. Lately, journalists have been asking questions on the streets. They've been interviewing people on the streets. But then the police started to meddle. The police started to intervene because these journalists were said to be provoking citizens. They're not interviewing them, they are provoking them. Now, as you know, the University of Bosphorus University is coming under attack by the government. And the members of these protests started a WhatsApp group, and a 23-year-old girl was taken under custody, and then she was imprisoned for starting this WhatsApp group. Well, of course, in such an environment, it's also a criminal offense to make jokes. Some youngsters made a joke about the Minister of the Economy, Albayrak, who quit his job. They created a poster of him with his picture saying "wanted" underneath. Because after Albayrak quit his job, we never heard from him ever again. And so these youngsters were taken under custody for creating this poster. And being taken under custody is worse than being jailed, because you can be kept under custody for 4 days without being presented to a judge. And they come to your house in the morning between 4 and 5 o'clock. They wake you up and they take you under custody. I think that's enough for now.
Thank you very much. That was a very clear, let's say, testimony about daily life. And we can talk about big principles and about great ideas and a lot of discussions. But what Professor Baskın gave us was from the real daily situation. And I was quite, how to say, on the impression that what he said was indeed, it's not only about the freedom of expressions, freedom of speech, but even the freedom of thought, which of course, when we go that way, is still a lot worse, because when the governments or authorities start to talk about what you think, I think that it's really a step extra more in violation of human rights and human dignity and human independence. Thank you very much, Professor Baskın. Anyhow, the next speaker has been working in different media outlets in different situations. I think he was working also for Huffington Post and Cumhuriyet. But for the moment, Mr. Yavuz Baydar is editor-in-chief of the media outlet Ahval. And I take the occasion also because when we talk about freedom of the press, we often talk about the published press, the classic press. It is very typical in a situation where a country is not anymore in a democratic tradition, that the online media, the media that work through internet, become more and more important. And as has been explained already, the Turkish government for the moment also want to grab on that. But with Yavuz, we have a clear example with a media outlet. I think he's working from Paris, from abroad, but where we still can reach people with opinions. And Yavuz will explain more the global situation. It's not about him, it is about the global situation and where we stand with freedom of the press in Turkey. Yavuz, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Leruth. Two additional things about myself. I served as media ombudsman or mediateur in Turkish domain for about 15 years. So that gave me possibilities to monitor the situation from the point of view of freedom, but not only freedom, but also independence in terms of censorship, self-censorship, and all those related issues in 15 years. And in 2 cases, I was fired from my job. And second, I wrote a very extended report about the corruption of the media ownership and self-censorship for Harvard Kennedy School 7 years ago, but the report in 12 major parts is still valid. I will offer you an expose over the overall situation, which might be somewhat complementary to what Philippe Leruth offered, because there are so many different aspects of the miserable situation now. It's basically a state of emergency where free speech and media freedom finds itself in for many years now in Turkey. I am now in exile, like many other colleagues in Europe and North America and elsewhere. I think the number, fairly speaking, is about 200. Those colleagues from various flanks of Turkish media, numbering about 200, mainly in Western Europe, but elsewhere too. It was a difficult time after the attempted coup for many of my colleagues. Some of us were lucky, some of us were less lucky. Some had to flee under horrendous circumstances. Some left normally, but the fact remains the same, that they are unable to operate freely, independently, safely in Turkey now. And I think we see now formation of what one might call an exile media or diaspora media, whatever you might want to call it. It's important because you mentioned online journalism, and to a certain extent, TV gives us possibilities to address the issues, to report correctly, accurately. What is missing in Turkey is very clear in those terms. Turkey has become a hell for fake news, lies, and immense propaganda, and of course, a blackout of what's been happening inside Turkey and outside Turkey for the public in general. And I will offer you this expose with the risk of slightly exceeding my time, but I think the facts and findings are important to note at this moment. During my career, I was both inside journalism, as I mentioned. There are various dimensions of this: censorship, self-censorship, corruption, ethical breaches. Internal polarization in the sector is also very important. And this kind of activity should continue to update these informations. When we look at the conditions of the journalism in any country, 4 basic criteria is important. Those are the pillars of what makes journalism consistent, credible, and influential. Freedom, editorial independence, pluralism and diversity, and safety. These are the things that make the fourth power. And without a solid democratic constitution and independent judiciary, there is absolutely no way in journalism to thrive, to operate. And this is what we have seen since the attempted coup. Judiciary is now part of the political executive. It's not protecting, it's not constituting a shield, a legal shield for journalism. It has become power in itself. And if you look at Hungary, Poland, Russia, Egypt, Brazil, all of them countries are really experiencing the same problems. And if Trump had to leave White House, despite attempts to take over power fully, judiciary and the media work together in a way from their points of view and protected democracy. Since about, of course, the things went in opposite direction in Turkey, far worse. And it's a very, very scary case study, globally speaking. Since 2014, more or less, having lost the judiciary, Turkish media became more and more vulnerable, individually, journalists, but also institutions. Since 2013, we have been watching an endless downward spiral of our profession. As many of you, of the listeners know, events known as Gezi Park protests was the major breaking point in speeding up the destruction of our job. In June 2013, when the protests spread to 80 out of 81 provinces, many journalists were fired. And soon after, following year, 2014, Freedom House, for the first time, downgraded Turkey from partly free to not free. And this caused a lot of fury in the government, but it was very clear that Erdogan, keeping very busy, trying to take full control over the TV channels, and I will explain why, had basically suffocated the mainstream media. And this then went all the way down. So after 7 years of nightmare, we are now at the rock bottom in the media sector. More than 95% of the media sector in direct or indirect control of the government. And the tiny 5%, maybe less, is in a very bad shape, losing ground every day. Turkey remains for 7 consecutive years as not free in Freedom House rankings, and Reporters Without Borders placed Turkey this time as 154th out of 180 countries. And also, I will mention European Court of Human Rights figures lately. Turkey ranks first among 47 Council of Europe member states and a number of judgments concerning violations of freedom of expression in 2020, many of them media, of course. 97 cases involving Turkey in 2020, and 85 were found to involve at least one rights violation. And most common violations were freedom of expression, followed by right to a fair trial and right to liberty and security. 97 rulings, I said. Turkey violated at least one article in the European Convention of Human Rights. And it was followed by Russia, etc., etc. But this tells you how severely intolerant the regime in Ankara is about the free speech or dissenting opinion. Please note also that this is not only a political or legal problem. The intolerance to freedom of expression in Turkey has for ages been a social and cultural phenomenon as well. The intolerance to dissent, objection, or civilized standing up attitudes meet often equally severe reaction from silencing across the society, even from the opposition circles. So the public discourse has always been somewhat damaged by this. This should be mentioned as well as a part of the cultural heritage, let's say. But back to institutionalized oppression and some facts. Those are assembled recently, these facts. How many journalists are in prison? Figures vary depending on the criteria. Reporters Without Borders say 13 at the moment. This is, to my view, far too low. According to Platform for Independent Journalism, P24, of which I am a founding member in 2014, those numbers are 83 as of January 2021. According to Stockholm Center for Freedom, it's far higher. 175 journalists are behind bars, and 167 are wanted or either in exile or at large. A total of 48 journalists spent at least one day in police custody last year. The reasons for their arrests including referring to the fate of Syrian refugees, investigating the government's handling of COVID-19 pandemic, corruption, and covering the Kurdish issue. And courts are very generous in handing out prison sentences. Record holders are 2 journalists. One of them, the other less known, The highest number of the years of imprisonment was given last year to Mehmet Baransu, a reporter who covered the military and its coup files and national security issues. It's a very dangerous assignment for Daily Taraf, a newspaper that's shut down now. Baransu was he was sentenced to 19 and a half years of imprisonment first, and then another 17 years and 1 month, which means he's now sentenced to a total of nearly 37 years of imprisonment. Then we have Can Dündar, the former editor of daily newspaper Cumhuriyet. He was recently sentenced to 27 and a half years in prison in December, about Christmas time in 2020, on charges of spying and assisting a terrorist organization. He was sentenced in absentia, and also his family's assets were seized thereafter. So another figure that should be mentioned is Turkey's oldest imprisoned journalist, Ahmet Altan, who is still being held in Silivri prison, although the life sentences that his brother Mehmet Altan, another journalist, Nazlı Ilıcak, received in 2018 were overturned by Supreme Court, and also European Court, for some bizarre reason, still holding Ahmet Altan case, not reacting to it. So, and other issues are 63 journalists were convicted of insulting the president since 2014. And then we have 139 Turkish journalists who were targeted by physical violence, direct physical violence. I said not only individual journalists, but institutions, outlets were also targeted. At least 160 media outlets have been forced to close since the attempted coup, more or less. And many of them are affiliated with the pro-Gülen movement media, but also many others are affiliated with the Kurdish issues, what you can call pro-Kurdish media, and also some parts of the Alevi flanks of the media or secular flanks of the media were also affected. And important point is how many were fired. This is also one way of dealing with the media freedom and independence. A total of 3,436 journalists have been fired from Turkish media since in the past 5 years. Only last year, 215 were left without a job. One important aspect that will tell you how about this state of independence in journalism is about job security. The rate of journalists who are members of trade unions is only about 8 to 10% in Turkey, which means for the rest, there is absolutely no job security at all. In summary, the freedom part of the media is breached severely by the following punitive steps. By filing lawsuits based on insulting the president, his family and ministers, based on anti-terror law and criminal code on terror propaganda, revealing state secrets, etc., by arresting journalists for what they try to cover by their reports or social media messages. Radio is not significant in Turkey as a venue, but TV is, and it tops the league of the popular media venue. This is very important. This is the reason why Erdogan and his government attacked TV news channels in 2013. Why? Because the facts don't change. According to UNESCO, Turkish audience, Turkish public overall get their news and commentary for free from TV channels, up to nearly 89%. This is more or less the same fact in Russia. So the one who controls the TV media in Turkey controls more or less the entire media sector and output. So that's why whatever happens in TV, it gets the attention of the government. That is proven fact after fact. So A few words about the online media, and I will stop there. This is also, I will mention a few words about newspapers. People don't read newspapers anymore in Turkey because of economic crisis, but also it's declining. Total circulation is less than half of what it was 2-3 years ago. And the tiny opposition, what they call themselves, newspapers, what I call critical media or partisan media, their circulation numbers do not exceed 9,000-10,000, with one exception, Sözcü, which is an opinion paper, sells about 200,000, but it has less news than opinion. So it's important to mention how the control mechanism is happening right now in today's Turkey. One major step was taken by the government to establish a Directorate for Communications, which directly reports to the palace, has no accountability or checks and balances responsibility whatsoever to Parliament, and it is run directly without any transparency to the government, to the president, actually. It's a presidential directorate. It employs thousands of people. It controls the media entirely and gives directions and warnings, and also in many cases executes certain punitive measures, such as causing dismissals or censorship. Radio Television Supreme Board, which is in the domination of the opposition party, the power parties, AKP and MHP, in its members, operates now as another censorship board, which it can issue licenses in cases that the venue is pro-government. It can stop issuing licenses. Also, it issues lots of fines and measures to block TV channels. Finally, about the online, because online is something that can still people breathe in terms of free speech to a certain extent. According to Yaman Akdeniz, a founding member of Association of Freedom of Expression, the past 7 years until October 2020, 140,000 URL addresses, 42,000 tweets, and 11,000 YouTube videos were banned access to in Turkey. Again, these bannings happen without any proper due legal process. It's done by another institution called BTK, which can arbitrarily impose those sections. Free Web Turkey, another monitoring site, found out that 42% of all banned news stories between November 10 to October 20 last year were about Erdogan and his family, such as his wife buying Vuitton bag in terms of French goods boycotting, etc. Those were the main majority. 56 URL sites were banned because of their critical news content on COVID pandemic. And I'm going to finish in a couple of sentences. Until last July, the main censorship measure was banning access to URL addresses, YouTube videos, as I mentioned. For example, our Ahval was banned 3 times because of our corruption stories. Then apart from that, Jin News, which is a Kurdish site, was banned 27 times last year. Oda TV, a sort of secular website, 4 times, independent Turkish version 4 times, etc., etc. Access bans are important. They are imposed often generously by peace courts, and the appeals process is totally cyclic. For example, one peace court issues a ban, you object to it, and it's the second peace court that decides about what to do, and those are directly appointed by the government, those judges. So it's a ridiculous, vicious circle which is happening there. Now, one major issue which is going to add more salt to the wound is the obligation being prepared to be imposed on social media giants. It's underway. They were forced to open offices and appointing representatives in Turkey. Most of them, except Twitter, accepted that. Twitter is resisting, and it's becoming more and more targeted because it started now to impose restrictions on government officials or ministers. For example, the Bahçeli tweets were now being restricted because what Twitter saw was inciting to violence, as well as Minister of Interior Süleyman Soylu's tweets were also restricted because he was attacking LGBT community in Turkey, targeting them. And this is, of course, adding causing a lot of anger amongst the government officials. So overall, in a nutshell, we are faced with a horrible situation where we find our domain narrower and narrower to reach the audience. It's an ongoing battle, but it's a very steep uphill battle. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yavuz. Perhaps because Yavuz mentioned Ahmet Altan, by coincidence we have his book here of Ahmet Altan. I want to pay tribute to him. It's a very interesting book, also very well written book about, the title in Belgium is I Will Never See the World Again. And it is a very good example of how people in an arbitrary way are kept in prison because of their ideas and what they are saying. And his special situation was that he, at the same time, was condemned for communistic agitation and Gulenistic agitation, which is quite remarkable to have both in one side. There are some questions. There is a question that has been asked to Professor Baskın. Those who help the victims financially and or giving psychological support are also targeted, the question says. What do you think about this, Professor Baskın? Can you ask it? So it's about the victims who are helping, people who are helping financially, psychologically the victims, are also prosecuted, also targeted. Can you give some comment on that? That was a question that has been raised.
Türkiye'de konuşabilirsiniz ve yazabilirsiniz. Eğer hapse atılma riskini göze alabiliyorsanız. Dediğim gibi konuşmak, yazmak serbest. Eğer içeri atılma riskini göze alıyorsanız. Sanıyorum bu cevap. Tabii ki biz bu kanunla, hukukla ilgisi olmayan yöntemlerle taciz edilen insanlara karşı çıkıyoruz. Ama bazı şeyleri göze alarak almaya da devam edeceğiz.
Other questions here. A question to Mr. Leruth, who said, do you think EU leaders can meet on common grounds to start a discussion on Turkey's EU membership status? I suppose that this question comes from the fact that we saw, and it's mentioned in the report also, that at the moment, discussions about EU memberships were going on. The human rights violations seem to be a bit less important than it was before and now, where these discussions are not really active. Philippe, can you react on that, please?
Yeah, the relationship between European Union and Turkey is very complicated indeed. Some months ago, you had the insults from President Erdogan to the French President Macron. And suddenly, Turkey changed its tone. The question of Turkey becoming a member of European Union, I think, I don't believe in it. And I'm not sure Turkish people still think it will be possible or reachable. And unfortunately, I noticed that those questions of human rights, press freedom, freedom of expression are not on the top of the list in discussions. If they can find agreement on Azerbaijan, on Libya, on gas exploration in the sea, that's the main topics. But unfortunately, the repeated condemnation of Turkey by the European Court of Human Rights don't draw so much attention by the European leaders.
Indeed, a question that is always very active. Do the European Union has to say Turkey first has to change, or do they have to continue to talk? The only way to change is to talk, of course, but we must admit that for the moment it is a very difficult one. I have another question here. Someone is asking, President Erdogan is talking about new constitution and a broad-based consensus to write it. What do we think? Well, there is a Latin proverb that says, timeo Danaeus et dona ferentes. That's Latin to say, I am afraid of the Danaish people, even if they bring gifts. And that's one to say, you should not trust someone when he is for 10, 20 years oppressing everyone to say we will work together. So let's say that as long as we do not see that this effort to make a new constitution that is talking about is serious, we should not keep it too much in mind. The first act to do when you want a constitution to be made in consensus is to free the opponents, not keep people imprisoned for their thoughts and not torturing people who have another idea. So I think that is our small answer. That is also about, do we have selective race about journalists? I think we should not be selective. There's two people who were mentioned, Hidayet Karaca and Ari Ünal. I think journalists have to be free and should express their opinions within, of course, the way that journalism has to be executed in a regular way. Then it has to be complete freedom. We have our last speaker of today. Our last speaker of today is Selçuk Gültaşlı. Sorry, Turkish name are really difficult for a Belgian professor. He's a journalist. He has been working in Belgium also as the chief of the office in Brussels. And of course, as unfortunately so many journalists, he has a very clear experience what freedom of opinion is not. And so I welcome you, Selçuk, and I give you voluntarily the floor. Thank you for participating anyhow.
Thank you very much for the kind invitation. My name is Selçuk Gültaşlı. I was Zaman's Brussels bureau chief until the newspaper was brutally confiscated by the Erdogan regime in March 2016. There is an arrest warrant on me for being a member of an armed terrorist group. After the failed coup attempt in July 2016, the state of the media freedom in Turkey has gone from bad to worse. According to Freedom House, Turkey's global freedom status is not free. It has only a score of 32 over 100. Its score in political rights and civil liberties is both 16 over 100. In terms of internet freedom, Freedom House ranks Turkey as not free. It scores only 35 over 100. Reporters Without Borders has ranked Turkey 154 out of 180 countries in its Press Freedom Index of 2020. Press freedom in Turkey is worse than Zimbabwe, Uganda, Tanzania, and Afghanistan, among others. The European Commission published its last progress report on Turkey in October. The progress report said there are currently 120 journalists in prison, which makes Turkey the champion of journalist jailer. According to the report, Turkish vice president stated that the press cards of almost 4,000 journalists have been canceled since 2015. Only in 2019, 715 cards were canceled. Again, according to the report, regarding the internet and the implementation of the internet law, Turkish authorities asked for the removal of almost 9,000 specific accounts in the first half of 2019. As of end of July 2020, access to 408,000, I repeat, 408,000 websites is blocked in Turkey. Only 21,000 of these websites that are blocked are on the order of criminal peace judges, public prosecutors' offices, or by a court decision. The rest were blocked by other state institutions. In other words, websites could be banned arbitrarily without an established set of rules. In some cities, human rights defenders and associations were forced to sign a document by the authorities indicating that they would avoid certain words and expressions such as war, trustee, right to election, and elect in their press releases. The Stockholm Center for Freedom, founded by exiled Turkish journalists, has a regularly updated list of jailed reporters. According to SCF, the number of jailed journalists is 175. Number of wanted journalists is 167. 94 journalists are arrested, 81 is convicted. Most of those convicted are from the Gülen movement, which Erdogan accuses of staging the coup, and its accusation the Gülen movement has denied. The second largest group of the jailed journalists is our Kurdish colleagues. The feud between Zaman and the government started with the largest corruption case in Republican history in December 2013. While Zaman insisted on deepening of the investigations, the then Prime Minister, Erdogan, called the investigations a coup attempt on his democratically elected government. In the investigation, 4 ministers, together with Erdogan's family members, were implicated. In the wake of December 17 corruption case, Erdogan changed many laws to be able to cover up the corruption. Many EU-inspired or EU-sanctioned laws were scrapped, taking back Turkey to the 1990s. On March the 4th, 2016, the government violently seized Turkey's largest circulating newspaper, Zaman. The editor-in-chief was forced out by the police together with many editors. The courts appointed so-called trustees to Zaman. Critical editorial line of Zaman changed overnight. It has become a very pro-Erdogan newspaper. The other day, Erdogan being at the headlines, laughing and boasting himself of great achievements. I myself, excuse me, I myself received an email on April the 5th informing that I was sacked on Turkish labor law, Article 25, paragraph 2. As I have never heard about this article, I got curious and Googled it. The article was giving the employer the right to sack its employees without any rights whatsoever when the employee was committing indecent, immoral behavior, including sexual assault at the workplace. Most of my colleagues have been fired based on this article to effectively prevent them to use their social and economic rights. I myself called the newspaper and wanted to talk to trustees. Despite being promised, no one called back. I emailed the trustees inviting them to provide me the evidence that I had committed indecent behavior in the workplace. There was no answer. I hired a lawyer to sue the trustees who sacked me without any shred of evidence. My lawyer has been arrested in 2017. I tried to hire other lawyers, but they were so intimidated, I couldn't find anyone to pick up my file. On July 15, 2016, an attempt by the military to overthrow the government failed. After the failed coup attempt, Zaman was banned. Right after the coup, 189 media outlets have been either shut down or seized. More than 30% of the journalists lost their jobs. At the end of August, there was a second list of journalists to be detained. And I was on that list together with my colleagues. I am being accused of membership in a terrorist organization. So I cannot go to Turkey for the last 6 years. In December 2016, the court decided this time to confiscate the properties of 54 people, most of them journalists from Zaman Daily. On the 1st of April, the judge of the case against many Zaman journalists decided to release them pending trial. However, after the verdict, a huge campaign started in the social media against the release, of course, by AKP supporters, some of them so-called journalists asking the judge to keep locking up their colleagues. The judge was personally threatened by one of the AKP columnists that he would himself be jailed. In the evening, the judge had to reverse his verdict and decided to keep my colleagues behind the bar. Nevertheless, he was dismissed from the case. I mean, he was banished. Same thing happened in Antalya. Zaman reporters who were imprisoned after the failed coup were freed and then re-arrested. The judge was also dismissed from the case. The message is clear. No judge can release journalists without prior authorization from the government. Those who dare to do so will be punished. The indictment that I was eagerly looking forward to read about the columnists of Zaman was accepted in 2017. The prosecutor was asking 3 aggravated life sentences for each and every defendant for attempting coup d'etat, and also asking 15 years imprisonment for each being members of an armed terrorist organization. I carefully read the 64 pages indictment. First of all, there is not one single weapon found related to defendants. There is not one single evidence connecting them to the failed coup, no communication whatsoever with the coup perpetrators or the military personnel. What the prosecutor has is the articles written by these columnists. Take the example of Şahin Alpay. He is being accused of participating in perception engineering. This is a new phrase invented by the prosecutor. His article of February 8, 2014 has the title of "Both Crime and Punishment Are Personal." This article is seen as evidence of perception engineering. There is a particular sentence at the indictment which deserves special attention. The prosecutor says, even in their articles, which seem to have no criminal activity, they have violated the rights of statesmen and government authorities. So the prosecutor himself actually admitting that there is no criminal activity. Let me quote another incredible paragraph from page 51 of the indictment. I quote, "In the media and web pages of the organization, a commercial had been aired on October the 5th for Zaman Daily. After an aerial image of a city center where we hear sirens, a baby is smiling on the screens. We assessed that this commercial was actually heralding the looming coup d'etat. Right after 9 months and 10 days of the start of the commercial of the sirens, the coup took place. This cannot be explained by mere coincidence." So a commercial that's aired almost 10 months ago was referred to as an evidence that Zaman knew the exact timing of the coup. On the same page, prosecutors this time referred to the commercial of Aksiyon Weekly, which was also affiliated with the Gülen movement. Analyzing the commercial, prosecutor discovered another baby who cries along with the firing weapons. When the weapons fell silent, the baby starts smiling. Prosecutor believes this commercial was also the message of the coup. However, the weekly was published in January 2014. Another media group was also targeted for its affiliation with the Gülen movement. İpek Media Group was owned by a businessman called Akın İpek, and he was critical of the Erdogan regime. The group had 2 newspapers, 2 TV channels. In October 2015, even before the coup d'etat, the government confiscated the media group. And after the coup, the companies of Akın İpek were confiscated. The company's value was estimated to be around $10 billion. As I stressed at the beginning, Turkey is an acceding candidate country to the European Union since 2005. Since I am in Brussels and have covered Brussels for so many years, I want to say a few words about the European Union. The EU decision of December 2004, which started accession talks with Turkey, clearly states that if there is a consistent breach of rule of law, the talks will be suspended. I quote that paragraph. In the case of a serious and persistent breach in a candidate state of the principles of liberty, democracy, respect for human rights, and fundamental freedoms, and the rule of law on which the Union is founded, the Commission will, on its own initiative or on the request of 1/3 of the member states, recommend the suspension of negotiations and propose the conditions for eventual resumption. End of the quote. Despite this clear wording of the paragraph, EU has pursued a policy of appeasement vis-à-vis the Erdogan regime. The last Commission report I just referred to has determined that Turkey does not fulfill the Copenhagen criteria anymore. The agreement of 2016 on refugees, maybe we should say the dirty deal between Turkey and the EU, has been very successfully instrumentalized by the Turkish government. Erdogan has very successfully bought the silence of European Union in return for stopping refugees. Under the watchful eyes of EU, Erdogan changed the constitution by a controversial referendum for a one-man rule. So we have a new constitution with no checks and balances right now. So the last sentence I want to say is, despite the backsliding on almost each and every EU criteria, Brussels pretends Turkey is still a candidate country, which I found, the position of European Union, which I found shameful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I have some questions. Yavuz, there is a question here that someone is asking. He wrote Clay, that's his name. He says, how safe it is for journalists in exile to write their stories. Abdullah Bozkurt was molested in Sweden, for example, by 3 men. Are you and your colleagues in exile also threatened by phone calls, mail, social media, etc.? Can you answer that, Yavuz?
Yes, this has become a worrisome pattern now. Not only journalists, but some academicians and politicians as well in Europe were experienced some targeting, especially in Germany and Scandinavia. We are aware of this. There has not been any tangible picture of threat that we face, but we followed, or we do follow, the cases in Berlin especially, where some of our colleagues go with bodyguards, where the density of people from Turkey are many major German cities. There are people with origin from Turkey, and many of them are supporters, staunch supporters of the government. And there have been one assassination attempts in Austria to the Green MP candidate Berivan Aslan, one open telephone threat to social scientist Burak Çopur in Essen, and also a physical attack, as you mentioned, in Stockholm. I think each and every country should be aware that these patterns are, as long as the government continues on this path, will continue to be powerful reminders of what we face. So everyone should be aware of this fact. It's not an easy job to continue to do this. Even in free domains, I would say. And another question, I think there is another question that I saw. I can see the questions by Ivo.
Yes, it's to you. It is in Turkish. I cannot read it.
No, there's one in English.
Yes.
I think it's Ivo Fitzherbert.
Yes.
Says, you mentioned access bans. We are talking about online media. And as part of the new social media law, an additional law was added alongside the normal access ban. Rather than blocking access by blocking URLs of specific content, this law forces news publishers to remove the content from their websites. Yes, this is a very, it's quite new. And it is monitored by Engelli Web site. And we see every day people reporting, especially people in powerful positions, the government officials, bureaucrats, or directly MPs of AKP or MHP, or business personalities affiliated with the power circles. They are keeping very, very busy to remove this content 1 year before, 2 years before. So it is like cleansing a public memory, which is happening, I think, in a more wide-scale sense than any other country that I know of. So this should be put into attention. I will also remind in this context that my colleague, I don't think he mentioned it, but one of the most tragic aspects of memory deletes has happened already with many of the institutions, outlets, whose websites were closed down, for example, the Daily Taraf, but many other examples that are there, and their total digital archives were deleted. In the case of, for example, today's Zaman, which was a very influential newspaper in English, its archives are gone. It was used by academia, by think tanks. Many people wrote op-ed articles or findings, and they are gone. All these links, references are gone, evaporated. And this, I think, is an unprecedented barbarism that we have faced in terms of deleting the memory. And now this removal of the contents is a new phase, which will leave the public memory null and void.
We have here a statement. It's not a real question, and I will give it in English because I cannot read the Turkish version. It's someone, I will read the testimony. It has nothing to do with freedom of press, but I want to do it. I'm an officer posted in Romania. I was taken into custody and charges of manslaughter, wounding, and attempting to do the coup d'etat. Following such slander, I received a dishonorable discharge. I was never involved in anything, but they put my name on the international wanted terrorist list and put a cash prize on my head, only because I saw that Turkish and world public opinion were deceived, and because I exposed them and struggled against them. They organized a lynching against me through use of various fake news on the media. And I now see, he continues, the press is being suppressed to hide the events, to hide torture, to hide rape, enforced disappearance, corruption, and to silence and intimidate society. And finally, to destroy the country, which is in the same sense as already has been said here. I still have here a question from Celik, who says there are a lot of undemocratic practices and everything depends on economy. Why the European Union and the United Nations don't decide on economic sanctions or travel restrictions on people who involved undemocratic practices to change the actual situation? After the declaration of the American government, Turkey stepped back and released Pastor Brunson. We talked about that in the former webinar. There is a movement, what they call the Magnitsky Act movement, which is trying to put indeed not only on the country sanctions, but also on the persons who are responsible, sanctions personally on travel bans and on economic sanctions. We must admit, however, that how the European Union in words often is declaring their support for human rights and for freedom and democracy, but still sees basically Turkey as an ally, as a partner to talk with, and about talking about freedom, but the acts basically are really not very convincing. I think we need to say that's how it is. There is some hypocrisy, I think, that unfortunately it's for American companies, it's American government, European governments, they are in a bit schizophrenic situation, what Selçuk said. And the people who really are a good intention are hesitating to say we stop anyhow negotiation or we will continue because it's the only way to push them still. And it is a bit an impossible catch-22 situation. Last question. Do the panelists think the critical opposition media in Turkey, as well as those in exile, managed to challenge the core narrative of the government? It seems some criticism evade what matters most, such as official narrative for coup attempt. So do we stay? I remember that Yavuz said 95% of the press is actually closed down or has no power to go against. Does the critical media still has an impact? That's a question. I will start with Yavuz and then with Selçuk and then with Professor Baskın to stop. First, Yavuz.
I would say, realistically speaking, it has limited influence, I think, in Turkish domain, at least, to reach, because online internet access nationwide in Turkey is somewhere between 55 to 60%. And it is concentrated on urban areas, mainly Western Anatolia, Istanbul, Izmir, Antalya, etc., and Ankara. And this is a very select audience, first of all. The conservative segments of the society or rural segments of the society use internet less, especially the voters of AKP, ruling AKP. And they have been, I would say, haunted by the TV controlled by the government. So the official narrative will continue to dominate. But what the critical media or alternative media does is basically to correct what's wrong, try to offer the truth for those who are interested in it. And there's also, I think, more and more usage of YouTube or podcasts that are also reaching the younger audiences. It's important to note that if there will be an election in the near future, which is very dubious in terms of fairness to be held in such elections, about 20 million of the voters in 2022-23 will be those below 30 years of age. And about 10 million of them, half of them, are still undecided. I think it is important to notice that these youngsters, young voters, first-time or second-time voters, are more tied to internet and online. Sociologically speaking, there are more possibilities there for online journalism to reach these audiences. So I think it's important to keep the flag high. It is also important to be aware that media control will continue. It's also important to notice that polarization inside the journalism sector is continuing. Unfortunately, still there are hostilities and enmities and undue suspicions at this stage between different flanks of the Turkish journalism. And these will be a counter operative to what journalism should do in Turkey. I think it's equally important that journalists from different flanks of Turkish media try to overcome these differences, because there is only one battle that is valid for all of us: freedom of the media, independence of the media, diversity, plurality of the media, and a powerful, free public discourse. This is what we should fight for, and nothing else. I think we have, as I said in my presentation, a very steep uphill battle to handle. But I put a lot of hope into what we are doing in online media. Us, for example, Ahval News Online, just to give an example, to conclude, we have about daily, about 250,000 unique visitors per day. We have about 12 million page views per month. We have an enormous following in podcasts, which is a challenge to government-imposed censorship, and also YouTube videos, which are also powerful, influential in terms of challenging the censorship efforts. So each and every one of us are competitors as well in alternative media. We do our bits, and we will continue to our bits. It's only the job, the profession that matters, at least for us at Ahval. We don't pay any attention to what to serve, etc. I think independence is very important.
Okay, I think that was a clear answer that counts a bit for everyone. We still have a question about the European Court of Human Rights, and what do you think about the visit of the European Court to Erdogan and the court's verdicts in favor of the regime? I think we must state that in the beginning, after the coup, that the European Court was very cautious and prudent and tried to avoid to condemn the regime. Supporting the regime after the coup, you could find it in the court, I think, and I think they made a mistake by that, by being too how to say, too nice towards what happened. However, I also must admit, and we have to see that lately, the last year, the European Court is finally becoming more critical, and I think that's an important sign. Anyhow, Turkish government is not executing the decisions yet, but we must see that in the Kavala case, for instance, Altan case, other cases, you see a difference where also, for the first time, the European Court is hesitating to say that the judiciary in Turkey is still independent, which is quite an important step for them. We can easily say it, but the court now, for the first time, went in that direction. What I learned from all the contributions, I will very shortly say, Philippe gave us a clear answer. Do Turkey respect international standards that are necessary in a democratic society? The answer clearly no, there is no doubt about. And it is not because it is a reaction of the coup, it is a kind of systematic approach, systematic tentative to shut down everyone who is critical and who has critical views. And Professor Baskın was very clear in saying, be careful, it's not only about freedom of expression, but it's even freedom of thought, what you think. They can judges and the government can even judge about your thinking. How do you think? Freedom of thought, which is even by far much more severe. The digital control was mentioned. I think it was Church who also said more than 400,000 websites who were blocked. That's an amazing number, of course. And Yavuz clearly said the younger generation is working with this digital, so it is crucial to have that. But I think to add that, and in a lot of reports we do not talk so easily, you can have the freedom to say something, the freedom of expression, but structurally the pluralism in the press. The fact you have different streamings, you have different owners, you have different outlets with different views is also important. If everyone is free to say what he wants, but only one group in the ultimate phase has ownership of the press, then this freedom, of course, has no content. And it's important that we not only think about the freedom, but also about the structural pluralism of the press. Yavuz said 95% of the press is not free anymore, doesn't exist anymore, or is under control and has not the right to say what they want. And we see indeed the targeting outside Turkey that you have to be aware of, and that for sure, if we come closer to elections and so on, the tension will be even more important. I would like to round up this webinar, we were about a good more than 500 people who have followed this webinar, which is an amazing high number, and I'm glad we could do that. The next webinar will be on March 10th, exactly on the access to justice and the independency of the judiciary, two also important themes, because every violation, if now it's freedom of the press or another one, that is not targeted by the judiciary will continue. Violations will continue if there are no judicial sanctions. The tribunal itself will be held from 3 to 7 May, normally in Geneva. If at that time the COVID pandemic would not allow us, we will do it finally on a digital way. We would like to do it physically. We think in May it will be possible. But anyhow, we will not let this pandemic silence us forever. There are limits to our patience and limits to our silence, and we have to speak up. We will do it physically. If we cannot, we will do it digitally in the beginning of May. I would like to thank everyone, the interpreters, both of them who were helping us, International Observatory for Human Rights, for organizing, the speakers, the participants, all the people who are attending us, and we hope to see you back on the 10th of March. Thank you very much and see you soon.